All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining the National Civic League for our April webinar, Elevating Libraries as Civic Spaces. We're very excited to be co-hosting today's webinar with our friends at the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. We'll be hearing from NCDD's Courtney Breeze a little bit later in the program. For now, my name is Rebecca Trout, and I am the Program Director of the All-America City Awards and Communications here at the National Civic League. For those of you a little bit less familiar with the League, we are a 125-year-old nonprofit, and we aim to advance civic engagement to create more equitable and thriving communities. One of the ways we do that is through our flagship program, the All-America City Awards, began in 1949 to really lift up and celebrate communities doing outstanding civic engagement work. So we use that award to recognize communities, and then we use this webinar series to really lift up those best practices and tools and resources that can help communities in their engagement work. Before we dive into today's content, I just wanted to give you a quick plug and update on this year's All-America City Award. Some of you will know that we do a different theme each year. This year's theme is Housing as a Platform to Promote Early School Success and Equitable Learning Recovery. We had some great applications submitted from across the country. Those have been reviewed, and we actually have notified all of the finalists and are going to be announcing that tomorrow, which is very exciting. So please keep an eye out for that press release. Those communities are going to be working really diligently in the next few months to put on wonderful presentations at our virtual event, which will be held in July in conjunction with our partners with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. But for today, we're very excited to be lifting up libraries as civic spaces. We are first going to be hearing from Samantha Oakley. She is the project director of the Libraries Transforming Communities project at the American Library Association. NCDD has been supporting ALA in that work by training libraries on facilitation skills. So Courtney will be joining us to talk about that. And last but not least, we'll be hearing from Kelly, who has an actual example of the community doing that with her library in North Liberty. Before I hand you off to their capable hands, just a few items of housekeeping. You'll notice that you're all muted. Please remain so, just to cut back on any background noise and be respectful of our speakers. We do want to hear your questions. Please either drop those in the chat throughout and we'll get them towards the end, or at the end you'll have the opportunity to use the raise hand feature and we'll unmute you and you can answer your question directly. We are recording, as you can probably see. We'll make sure that we send you this recording as well as the slides either later today or early tomorrow. And with that, I am happy to hand it over to Samantha. Samantha?
Thank you. So hi, everyone. I am so pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you all today about library-led community conversations. Many of you may, next slide, please. Many of you may be already familiar with the American Library Association, which is the national professional organization for librarians and information professionals. My department within ALA is the Public Programs Office. We work to empower libraries to create vibrant hubs of learning, conversation, and connection in communities. We do this by providing grants, exhibits, professional development opportunities, and resources to libraries of all types through our grant-funded projects and also our website, programminglibrarian.org. So next slide, please. So before we dive into talking about library-led community conversations, we really want to define how this fits within civic engagement work that libraries are doing across the country. And what we mean by civic engagement, and a lot of you already know, is the process of working collaboratively with individuals, be they library customers, residents, faculty, students, or partner organizations, to address public concerns for the betterment of the community. Increasingly, libraries offer patrons a welcoming space to meet their neighbors, to discuss and explore issues of importance with them. In this sense, as part of their civic engagement work, many libraries are taking on the role of facilitating dialogues within their communities on important issues or topics. Discussions libraries have led range widely, anywhere from large national issues like healthcare to hyper-local, such as how to improve the water quality of Lake Champlain. Next slide, please. Within this falls our office's work with Libraries Transforming Communities Initiative, or LTC as we call it for short. LTC was developed due to a growing call from library workers for resources and professional development opportunities to learn how to do this work. Launched in 2014, LTC aims to strengthen libraries' role as core community leaders and change agents by developing and distributing new tools, resources, and support for librarians to engage their communities in new ways. Through this project, we hope to shift public discourse away from themes about libraries in crisis or being antique institutions toward talk of libraries as agents of positive change and discussion. Next slide, please. This shift in public perception can often lead to the question of why libraries for this work. The answer is because even during this challenging time, and especially during this time, libraries are called upon to serve the community in new and important ways. I think ALA's executive director, Tracy Hall, expressed it best when she said, "It's our job to ensure that all users have access to an array of arguments, sometimes competing arguments, so they can make their own decisions about the world and their place in it. Often, especially today, in our increasingly siloed, echo-chambered society, that means libraries must curate and host conversations themselves. Conversations are an exchange of ideas, and the library is a natural home for that. In fact, your local library is almost certainly already leading conversations through a variety of means, including hosting community reads, book clubs, panel discussions, and so much more." Next slide, please. So we support libraries in doing this work through a variety of different ways, the primary one being LTC, and I'll talk about some of the resources that we provide under that initiative just briefly. Next slide, please. First up, we provide monetary support through grant opportunities under the initiative. Our most recent opportunity provided $3,000 for approximately 600 libraries to lead conversations on topics of importance for their communities. And in November of 2022, we will be launching another grant opportunity. This one will offer more than $7 million in grants to small and rural libraries to lead conversations with the goal of finding out how they can increase the accessibility of their facilities, services, and programs to better serve people with disabilities. More information about this opportunity can be found on ala.org/LTC access, which you can see on your screen here. Next slide, please. In addition to the monetary support we provide, we also offer a plethora of free professional development resources, many of them co-developed with NCDD, which Courtney will talk about later. Just as a quick overview, these include a facilitation guide, an asynchronous e-course on how to lead community conversations, examples of dialogue and deliberation models that work well for different library types and community sizes, and much more. These resources are all available for free on ala.org/LTC. Next slide, please. The final resource that I want to quickly mention is programminglibrarian.org. The website was built by our office to help facilitate connections and peer-to-peer sharing among programming librarians. As such, it contains articles, blogs, and program models written by library workers from all types of libraries across the country. It's a great resource for seeing examples of what libraries are doing and for hearing about new grant opportunities from our office. Next slide, please. To wrap up my portion of the presentation, I just want to briefly give a few examples of community conversations we've seen libraries leading, many with support from these resources that I mentioned. Next slide, please. First up is an example from Louisville Free Public Library in Kentucky. Louisville has been leading community conversations through their Cafe Louis program series. This initiative gives Louisville residents the opportunity to meet with state and local elected officials at the library branches for discussions on local topics. In total, 38 elected officials participated in the series, with 13 of them attending multiple programs. Attendance typically fluctuates depending on the topic, but their most engaged sessions have close to 100 participants. I really love this example because it provides community members the opportunity to talk directly with local leaders about important topics and helps them to be well-informed and civically engaged. Next slide, please. The next example is from Owl's Head, Maine. It's a tiny volunteer library that operates on a $1,000 annual budget. Until this year, the library was solely for borrowing and had never hosted a community event. With the LTC Focus on Small and Rural Communities grant, Diane Nelson was able to provide a platform and community engagement project. So she wanted to host a virtual event to start a conversation about what had become a controversial local topic, which was the local airport had proposed an expansion and it was up for vote by the town. There was lots of misinformation floating around, and residents were very upset about rumor that the change would bring in large passenger jets. Nelson and the library board hosted a 90-minute Zoom forum in which libraries from the town, county, and airport responded to residents' questions. The town vote was actually postponed until after the library conversation because the town felt it was critical to have this platform and discussion with its community members. In this case, Diane made the choice to hire a professional moderator rather than lead the conversation herself. She said for most other topics, she would have led the conversation, but she knew it was critical for the library to be objective and have a third-party facilitator help with that. In total, 140 people attended the forum, and afterwards, voters overwhelmingly voted against the expansion. Next slide, please. The final example that I want to highlight is from POTTSBORO Area Library in Pottsboro, Texas. You may remember the winter storm that hit Texas last year, I believe. And during this time, there was a certain amount of chaos because the city of Pottsboro actually lost electricity for 4 days and water for 5 days. Unexpectedly, it was the library that rose to the occasion. They became a hub for distributing water to people who needed it. Hundreds of people would pull up to the building with containers to meet large trucks carrying well water. Afterwards, many residents were angry at the city for not responding quickly enough. The library was praised though, so they were in a strong position to bring people together afterwards to talk about what had happened. Library Director Diane Connery hosted a conversation about how the community could be better prepared the next time there is an emergency. In that conversation, it was clear that residents wanted to be actively involved in any response. Working with the county, the library offered a 9-week community emergency response team training at the library. Diane, of course, wanted her community to be prepared, but she said she also had strategic reasons for being involved. She brings up an important point. Strategically, one of the reasons we think it's important for the library to be involved in emergency preparedness / disaster response is to elevate our position and open new funding streams. Unfortunately, some stakeholders in government positions still believe the library is limited to checking out books and offering story times. Through this initiative, they were able to raise their profile as a place for critical community discussions and engagement. And with that, I want to turn things over to Courtney.
I'm very happy to follow Samantha in sharing a little bit about the role that NCDD has played in the work that libraries are doing in convening community conversations. Before I do that, just for those of you who may not be familiar with us, NCDD stands for the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. We are a network of folks, both individuals and practitioners, who do this work kind of broadly defined as dialogue and deliberation and public engagement, certainly across the US, as you can see here in this little graphic that shows our membership. We also have great representation in Canada and several other countries as well. But NCDD really serves as kind of the resource home and kind of the network home for folks who do this work. And this is just a nice little image of some of our members. This was from a project we did several years back now, actually, probably closer to 10 years back, if I think about it, where we asked them to talk a little bit about what they do and do that in image for one of our events that we held. So NCDD, as I said, really supports our network of folks who do this work, but we've been so happy to be able to also support the work of libraries in convening community conversations and facilitating those conversations through our partnership with ALA, working on the Libraries Transforming Communities initiative. So I'm going to kind of just add a little bit to what Samantha has shared with you about that work, and talk a little more specifically about some of the work that we've done with the libraries and share some examples of what they've been doing. So as Samantha already mentioned, there's been numerous resources that have been developed as a part of this initiative. And we have been very happy to help to produce those. So, notably the facilitation guide, the asynchronous e-course that Samantha mentioned, both focused on really transferring the skills of planning and facilitating community conversations. So really great resources that are available up on ALA's website. Written for the library context, of course, but certainly helpful resources to anyone who's looking at convening conversations at a community level. In addition to that, over the years, I think this might be our 6th year working with ALA, which is wild and amazing. We've done numerous webinars, and so a lot of those videos are available up on the LTC site. I'll mention some of the models that we've shared in addition to more of these general facilitation type skills that we've offered in a moment. And then we've also been able to offer coaching support. So one of the great things that's gone hand in hand with the grants that Samantha just talked about for small and rural libraries is we've been able to offer some more group coaching opportunities for libraries. Most of that has happened online out of necessity. We've been able to offer them some workshops and training, as well as coaching calls to give them a little bit further of a deep dive into thinking about what they're going to do with these conversations, planning for them, and also practicing some of their facilitation skills. So it's been a really great opportunity for us to support them in addressing the needs of their community by giving them some further guidance and skill building opportunities to go hand in hand with those efforts. So just to kind of step back for a second, Samantha mentioned that we have shared different models for community conversations with libraries in the past. Most notably when we worked on the Models for Change initiative within LTC several years back. And so I thought I would just give a shout out briefly to those models that we have shared. And for each of these, I'll mention that there is video up on the LTC site of the sessions that we did, which kind of provide an overview introduction to these models and how they can work in a library context. So helpful resources to those who might be looking to explore some possibilities. So the models that have been shared include Conversation Cafe, which is a very simple and kind of open source model for kind of exploratory conversations or conversations that are, perhaps digging a little bit more into, conflict or increasing understanding of different perspectives. Everyday Democracy's Dialogue to Change approach was shared with our larger libraries in mind. There's been some great work done through some larger libraries. Hartford Public Library in Connecticut, for instance, has utilized this approach. I also believe New York Public Library has as well. Samantha's nodding her head. That's right. Good. So they've done some amazing things there where they've really been able to convene the community in conversations that are focused on looking at what are the changes we want to see, and really focused on helping people come together and be active in making those changes happen. Future Search is another model that has been shared. It's very much a kind of deep strategy-centric model that brings people together to really figure out what is it we want, how are we going to get there? So a really great tool for libraries to use, where that's kind of the goal in mind. National Issues Forums, which provides lots of great materials for these larger national conversations. Samantha mentioned healthcare. They have great conversation tools around climate, around voting, around policing and other things. And so sharing that with libraries has been great in terms of giving them a lot of the model, but also the resources that are already written and available to them to utilize. We've also shared reflective structured dialogue from essential partners, very much again, kind of that conversation dialogue model based on the goal of increasing deep understanding and building connections in a community can be really powerful. And last but not least, World Cafe, which is a great idea generator, opportunity for folks to connect and kind of build off of one another through multiple rounds of conversations. It's something that had been utilized by libraries long before we came into the picture and shared this in LTC. One example is Portland, Maine. Their public library used World Cafe years ago now for conversations, amongst them one on building a welcoming community in Portland. Brought different partners together to talk about, how do we build that welcoming community? And it's been a great example that I've loved to share with folks because it was, a really powerful example of a simple question, but a really deep conversation that can emerge from that. And anecdotally, I'll just share with you that there is a library here. I'm based in the Los Angeles area. There's a library in Orange County, California, who actually recently reached out to me because of that example. And it's something that they're looking at potentially trying to kind of adapt themselves as they look at engaging community partners in a lead up to hopefully some further community conversations on a number of topics of importance for their community. So that work continues. All right, so in addition to sharing those specific models, libraries have had the opportunity to really build their skills in a number of areas. And these are the items that we've really emphasized in our work with them, whether that be through the course, the facilitation guide, the workshops we've provided, or even the coaching calls. So we've talked with them and worked with them on developing partnerships. So as many of you know, I'm sure when it comes to doing an initiative, whether that be talking about, an issue of kind of urgent importance in the community, or bringing people together to, really ask them about, what they would like to see for the future, or even just giving people an opportunity to explore something of interest together. All of that is much easier to do when you have partners. Both in terms of bringing people in, but also just strengthening the content of that conversation. So we've really worked with them on thinking about who those partners can be and how to approach them. Identifying and framing topics for conversation. So really figuring out, what is that topic that they're ultimately going to engage folks around, and how to talk about it in a way that folks feel welcomed into the conversation, different perspectives are welcome, and it's really set up for a good exchange of information and engagement. Marketing and communications, again, that how do you talk about these events and get folks into the room? Designing the conversations themselves. So as I've mentioned, we've shared several models, but we've also really talked to them about the nuts and bolts of what goes into just a quality conversation, and how to create that based on the goal that they have in mind, what they'd like to see happen, and the topic that they have identified. And then ultimately facilitation skills. So not only are the libraries convening, but many of them are facilitating. There have been some instances where they've felt like having an outside facilitator has been helpful, and that can be. But many of them have taken this on themselves to facilitate these conversations. And so we've really been supporting them in learning the skills necessary to be able to do that comfortably and competently. So just to share a little bit of what libraries have been doing, this is just a sample. You heard Samantha mention before, they have given out grants to about 600 libraries. So this is just a tiny, tiny little list of some of the topics that folks we've been working with have been focusing on. So things like mental health, talking about that, individually, but also in terms of community support for individuals. Voting, a lot of libraries have been using books as a means to open up the doors to these conversations on things like voting. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, oh goodness. I'm forgetting my example there. I'll come back to that one. But books on things like voting on racial justice have been utilized to kind of help launch some of these conversations. Food access. So a number of libraries have identified their communities are in food deserts or have some level of food insecurity. And so they've used these community conversations as an opportunity to bring folks together to talk about, what are the needs of our community in terms of food access and how do we help address that? Things like encouraging student reading. A couple of libraries identified that student reading and book checkouts drop off in the summer. So thinking about how they can continue to engage those young people and keep them active in those summer months. Some of that has looked like conversations with young people, whether that's about a certain book or about other things, asking them what they'd like to see from the library, things of that sort, to really keep them active and a part of that community. Others have held community conversations around supporting the LGBTQ plus community in various ways, both, what our programs or services the library can offer, but also thinking more broadly about how do we as a larger community be supportive of our LGBTQ plus community. Things like use of public spaces and parks, and then, things even as simple but powerful as really connecting families who homeschool with the library. So thinking about ways that the library can be supportive of those families who homeschool their children, looking at, at ways that they can kind of connect and further support one another. So it's been amazing to see just the variety of topics that the libraries have identified themselves as important community needs. Finally, I'll just share some of the goals that we've heard from folks in terms of why they've been convening these conversations. So for some, they've been connecting underserved communities to their services and programs or to other services and programs. In addition to working on the LTC initiative, I have also, in my capacity with NCDD, had several other opportunities to connect with library workers over the years. Some of them have really focused the opportunities to hold conversations on a chance to really find out from some of these communities that are underserved, what they need that the library could offer to them, or just what are some of the practicalities of them utilizing the library, whether that's hours, whether that's language, and so on. I worked briefly with a library staff person in South LA who was looking at, how do I further engage with the Latinx community to, think about really how can we better ensure that the library is meeting their needs, because she recognized, that there wasn't a utilization of services as much from that community, for instance. Others have used community conversations to really gather input to inform their strategic planning. So as the library has been preparing for a strategic planning process, they've been using community conversations to really learn from the community about what are their current needs, what do they most appreciate about the library, any desires that they have, and they've been able to utilize that as they go into their strategic planning process. So very great opportunity for them to use that to really inform their plans. Others have engaged community members on issues of importance to inform decision-making. Samantha's touched on some of that. Other examples, folks have held community conversations around climate-related issues. They've held conversations around whether that's disaster-related issues. One library that I had a chance to talk to was heading up the state of Delaware's library disaster initiative, meaning the library staff working together on disaster preparedness, the libraries being one of the places that could be very supportive to the community in times of disaster. Samantha just touched upon that in terms of POTTSBORO. So very similarly, this was a network of libraries looking at how they do that. And so engaging the community around what they could do would help to inform decision-making in terms of their plans as they looked forward to the needs in their community and their state. In some cases, libraries have been creating space for community members who need support or just need connection. One example of that was a library worker who wanted to look at creating some space for caregivers to come together, creating opportunities for them to have a space to connect, to share with one another, find support with one another, as well as explore, again, ways that the library perhaps could support their needs. And then, of course, creating new opportunities for exploration and learning. Libraries are fantastic spaces for that. They offer so many programs that give people a chance to learn something new, explore new topics. And so community conversations have been a natural addition to that and a way to continue to enhance that learning and opportunities for the community to engage. So I have talked pretty generally about some of these things with a couple of examples, but I am now excited to be able to hand things over to Kelly, who's going to actually share her example from her library and the work that they've been able to do. So welcome, Kelly.
Hi, thank you so much, Courtney, and thank you so much to ALA and the LTC initiative for having me on today. I am Kelly Forkenbrock. I'm the Public Services Librarian for North Liberty Library here in Iowa, and I'm going to share my screen here, and then we will take a look at what I have to say. Let's see, share, all right. Sounds good. All right, everyone should see this. So let me grab this here and then start the slide deck. This current slide. All right. So as I mentioned, I am the Public Services Librarian for North Liberty Library, and we were one of 200 libraries awarded in the first round for Libraries Transforming Communities, for the Libraries Transforming Communities grant. With that funding, we created Lighthouse in the Library, which is a quarterly conversation series that we have with our community on a variety of topics. We were awarded the grant in January of 2021, and then launched our first event in April of that year, where we talked about local food and wellness inequities, giving us a chance to talk directly with our community as well as local business and organization owners about any health inequities happening in the community. That was our April 2021 conversation, which sparked the article that you see right here on the left side of the slide. During the second Lighthouse in the Library conversation, we talked about COVID-19. It took place the Thursday before school started in August of 2021. The picture here at the bottom shows the panel that we had for that discussion. We had school leaders, school representatives, educators, as well as a student on the panel to speak quite candidly to what we learned during the previous school year under the pandemic and what improvements we wanted to make going into the new school year. In January 2022, at the top of this year, we had our third Lighthouse event, and it was New Year, New Career. So it was focused on workforce development. We had a two-part series where we had one half of the event was a panel discussion, very much like the one you see pictured below. And then we had a job fair, a 2-hour job fair featuring 12 local and regional employers. So we really try to touch on a lot of different topics. Our next event, which I'll talk about near the end of my presentation, is going to be focused on cultural competency. We're partnering with the University of Iowa's Cultural Intelligence Center to pull off this private workshop for cultural QC, or cultural competency. We're really, really excited about that. That's happening next month on May 12th. But I say all this to say that, you know, we have the newspaper article. We were also a case study. I know Samantha mentioned programming librarian as a resource. We have a case study posted there as well, which I'll link later at the end of my presentation. And while this is all great, none of this happens without a team. I certainly do not facilitate, I serve as facilitator for all of the events, but all of the planning the months and months of planning that goes into creating these events definitely doesn't get pulled off without a team. So I really rely on our staff. We typically create a committee for each of the events. So we have a separate committee for the health inequities event, one for the COVID event, one for the workforce development event, and then we have one now working on the cultural competency event happening next month. And once I get our group together, and we're a small library, we have just a little over 18,000 residents here in North Liberty Library. So we're a very small library. I say small to mid-size. And we really work amongst our staff of about 15 people, and that does include our part-time staff. It's just, I feel so blessed that we have folks who are so interested in the Lighthouse and the Library Initiative that they hopped on board to plan with all 4 of these events. And some things that we talk about when we plan is, of course, how do we want the event to look? What kind of partnerships do we want involved in these events? You know, I think the easiest part is to come up with the topic. That's kind of the fun part, but also finding out the community partnerships that we want to engage to help round out our events. That is a little bit more strategic, as you can imagine. And with that, you know, I've found that throughout planning these 4 events, there have been 3 steps that we follow to make sure that we're cultivating key partnerships specifically for the Lighthouse events. The first is to be an outreach detective. And I often say this, you know, it's all about, you know, I come from a little bit about me. Before I began my career in librarianship just 3 years ago, I spent the first 20 years of my career in the private sector. I have a background with 10 years of program management for state testing contracts for college entrance exams. I have 7 years of experience in multimedia advertising for our local newspaper. So a lot of what I discovered about outreach in the private sector, I've been able to utilize here in the public sector. And it really is about being an outreach detective. It is really about identifying the relationships that you've established internally and externally to determine who heads up, and, you know, determining who heads up these businesses and organizations, visiting websites, and following social media pages. So it's not just about, you know, grabbing onto a contact, emailing them, you know, a template email asking them to be a part of the event. It's really about being very intentional about who we want to partner with these programs. We think about who do our patrons, who do our community members and neighbors want to hear from? Do they necessarily want to hear from a big company right now about this subject? Do they want to hear from a small business owner about this subject? Do they want to speak to a business owner at all? Maybe they want to hear from one of their own neighbors. And we've had all of those individuals represented throughout our 4 events. So really using your reference interview skills that you would use for a patron asking for information from your library is the same way you want to find out which local organizations or resources your patrons would want to hear from. Because one thing we kept in mind with Lighthouse is that this is a community conversation. This isn't an opportunity for the library to showcase different businesses who all have something to say about themselves. we are creating Lighthouse in the library to create a platform to encourage dialogue directly from our community members. In fact, we spend probably, I would say 40% of our events allowing our patrons to speak truth and talk about those subjects. Yes, we have subject matter experts in our partnerships, but when we're looking for outreach and looking for those folks who we want to participate in these events with us, we make sure that they understand that this is a community first conversation. One thing that we use, and I know many librarians may be using this, especially if you have a business librarian or a marketing librarian on staff, is an asset map. We have one of my biggest projects for this year is to redefine what the asset map looks like for us, making sure that all facets of our community are represented in our asset map so that we can curate the right contacts and the right relationships and identify also any gaps that we may be hitting. We want to make sure that we're identifying any gaps in organizations that haven't partnered with the library before. Really investigating that. Why hasn't this organization, why haven't we reached out to this organization before? I think that me coming into this role 3 years in, I feel like my detective skills have definitely gotten better, and it's really all thanks to the LTC program with the 6 weeks of training and of course the facilitation guide. I find that this is my 4th event that we're doing, and I still follow the facilitation guide to a T. In fact, every one of our staff members who participates on the planning committee for a Lighthouse event gets a copy and excerpts of that facilitation guide. Not necessarily because they will be doing the facilitating, more than likely I would be, but I want them to be just as educated about what this program looks like. I never want to plug in my coworkers and say, okay, you do this, you do that, you do this. No, it is all intentional that we work together from the same playbook, and the LTC facilitation guide is a fantastic playbook to work from. So my first step would be to be an outreach detective. Definitely reach out and be very intentional about who you want to engage. Number 2 would be make it a brainstorm, not a conversation. Again, we don't want these conversations, we don't want these exchanges with our partners to be transactional. We want them to be intentional. So when we approach a potential partner, we don't go in with a single idea of what the program would look like or how the partnership would work. I really try to avoid putting any potential partnerships in a space where they feel confined. I want to make sure that our partnerships are intentional, not transactional. And instead of me coming with a laminated idea of everything that I want to or may desire from the exchange, I always try to ask, what ideas that partner has, presenting the topic and saying, listen, we're going to be talking about food and health inequities. What are your thoughts about that? What are you seeing from your organization or your business regarding food and wellness inequities? And really just having a brainstorm about how we can make that topic a point of dialogue for our residents when they visit and come to the event. So that would be my second step, is to make it a brainstorm, not a conversation. And then number 3, it's all about focusing on the follow-up. And for someone who has had a sales career before becoming a librarian, follow-up has been a key factor of all of my relationships and partnerships in the past and presently. We want to make sure we're keeping our partners engaged by staying in touch. And that means not only before and, leading up to the event, but after. And whatever that engagement looks like for you, maybe planning next steps and saying, listen, while we're planning this event, making sure that they're engaged in all of the next steps, making sure that they understand that we appreciate them, and also encouraging our partners to share our information with their partners and letting them know that the library is an open space. I always like to tell folks, as the outreach arm for our library, that the library is more than books and free Wi-Fi. We are here for our families. We're here for emerging adults. We are here for our seniors, and we're here for our working professionals. So really focusing on that follow-up and making sure that we ask our partners and other organizations, if they ever want to be involved. And of course, if there's anything the library can do for them. So very often we forget, as library folks, we can be of assistance to these organizations and businesses. So really extending that hand, not only leading up to the event, but after the event has wrapped up, is a great thing to do as well. So those are my 3 rules: be an outreach detective, make it a brainstorm, not a conversation, and focus on follow-up. Some of the ways that we've measured our outcomes with Lighthouse. Number 1, post-event surveys. So as you can imagine, when we first received the award from LTC to fund this initiative, our first event was 100% virtual. We were still kind of in the throes of the pandemic, so we made sure to create not only using the Zoom feature to create an online survey, but we also printed out surveys because just in case a patron, and we did have a few patrons who said, hey, I stopped by the event and it was great and I logged on. We have the survey right here. Really great. We'd love to hear about your experience and have them fill out that very, very short survey while they're there. So post-event surveys. And then also when you get that information, find a platform to record all of those results in. It can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. There are databases that you can use to put all of that information in, because this is information that's going to fuel your next event. The post-event survey is not an ending. It honestly is a beginning to your next event. That's really how you have to look at it. So post-event surveys are crucial, not only to know how well you're doing, but also to show you what else you can do in the future for your patrons. I also conduct what I call lessons learned meetings with our committee after every event wraps. So when our committee comes in, it's usually about 3 to 5 of my fellow coworkers, we meet once again to talk about what we learned from this event. We talk about the good, we talk about the not so good, and we really do search for strengths and opportunities during those conversations. I love to have candid conversations in my lessons learned meeting, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure we take the ego out. It's not about what didn't go well and pointing blame. It is really about really looking at what strengths we held, and also where are some opportunities for improvement? What could we do differently with our next event that we didn't quite get down here? So lessons learned meetings with your committee after the event are very essential. And then last but not least, of course, planning for the future, using your post-event survey information, using that data, using the feedback from your committee, from lessons learned meetings, and also keeping an ear out to see what patrons are really concerned about. Keeping an ear out to your neighbors and seeing what they're talking about, especially when we're focusing on community conversations. We want to make sure that we're focusing on exactly what it is our community needs. So keep all of that in mind when you are planning post events or next events. As I mentioned, the next Lighthouse in the Library event is happening here at the library on Thursday, May 12th. It will be our 4th event under this banner. We are so very proud of what this event has become, and we are so very proud to be recipients of the LTC grant. And we really couldn't have done it without LTC, without ALA, and without the support, not only the financial support, but the training, the resources, the tools. Again, I cannot say enough about the facilitation guide. It is something that our library has used not only to fuel Lighthouse discussions, but even discussions amongst, just book clubs, like regular events that we do, when we do book clubs or when we have other presentations outside of the Lighthouse banner. It's been so helpful, and we're so happy to be having our 4th event. Again, we are collaborating with the University of Iowa's Cultural Intelligence Center. And this will be the first Lighthouse workshop. As I mentioned, our previous 3 events were kind of paneled events. So it's been just a joy. Again, I'm just so thankful, and our library is so thankful for everything that we've been able to accomplish with Lighthouse. I'll also leave a couple of links in the chat box below, including a link to the case study that we had featured on the Programming Librarian site. So that's all I have. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, but again, I welcome any and all questions.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Some really great work happening there. Samantha and Courtney, thank you so much for giving us a great overview of the program and those resources that you're providing in the form of that facilitation guide. We do have a couple of questions that I want to try to fit in here before the end of our time together. Our first one was in regards to Cafe Louie, but I think it would kind of apply to any of the dialogue events that were referenced today. And the question was about any feedback that was received from the legislators during the process. So in general, were there contentious moments and how are those navigated? So I don't know if anyone knows that about Cafe Louie specifically, but in general of the other dialogues, how do you kind of handle those contentious moments?
Yeah, I can speak quickly to Cafe Louie. So they did mention that depending on the topic that they were covering, it could get contentious and very emotional between the legislators and the people attending the sessions. In a large part, the way that they were able to handle it is by having good facilitators and being able to utilize best practices for navigating those tensions. But overall, the legislators have had very positive things to say about the programming, and I think that is also reflected in the fact that they have over a dozen repeat legislators constantly coming to the programs.
Absolutely. And Kelly, I'll ask you a little bit about this question as well. With the events that you have held, how have you handled any sort of contentious moments amongst your participants?
That is a great question. And that was actually one of the ways that the facilitation guide was absolutely helpful. We included a parking lot, meaning a huge Post-it note plastered to our wall. And it really served as a good way to kind of diffuse any unhelpful dialogue, because there's debate and then there's unhelpful dialogue. And whenever we found that the subject was veering off course, or maybe it was getting a little bit too much ego in the conversation and not enough, engagement, we would tell the participant, thank you very much for your feedback. We do have a parking lot here. We'll go ahead and place your idea here and consider it for future Lighthouse events. However, this event right now, we really want to focus on food and wellness equity. So it was a great way to engage the patrons, because these topics can get very, very heated. I mean, when you're talking about the pandemic a week before school starts, when you're talking about workforce issues, it can get contentious, and we want to honor that, but we also want to give space for the real conversation to emerge. So we found that the parking lot and kind of using that idea that we got from the facilitation guide was very helpful.
Great. And I think that really speaks to the importance of having trained facilitators and making sure that, you might be very well intentioned, but don't just jump into this without any training, because then those conversations could actually become harmful to those communities. All right, and now just kind of a logistical question, probably more for Samantha and Courtney, is what are the sort of first steps for a library looking to join the LTC effort, maybe to start hosting some of their own dialogues?
Yeah, so the LTC resources like the facilitation guide that Kelly has mentioned and NCDD co-wrote with us is available for free for any library to access and use in their libraries. The same with the asynchronous e-course that is also freely available, and it's open at any time. You can take it at your own pace. It's about 6 hours in length, I believe. And then Also, we offer grant opportunities regularly if you want to be a formal cohort member like Kelly. So the next one is opening up in November of 2022. And I also want to mention, because I see Nancy Chronic in the chat. Hi, Nancy. She is a former ALA president and a generous supporter that made it possible to make LTC engagement grants available on a yearly basis. So in that opportunity, we offer 2 libraries each year, $2,000 grants to support their community conversation work. So that is also open and will be available in this coming fall as well.
Great, thank you so much for that. And the topic of health and health equity came up a couple of times during today's presentation. So I just want to make a short plug for a supplemental award and opportunity through the National Civic League. It's our Health Equity Award. I'll include this in the follow-up email, but basically it awards individuals who are successfully implementing a systems change approach to improve health outcomes. So I know it's not directly related to, but it seems tangentially so, and that deadline has been extended until May 4th. So if you or anyone that you know is working towards health equity, either in your library or any of your partners, please encourage them to apply. The winner does receive a $3,000 award as well as recognition at our All-America City Awards. All right. After that quick plug, we just have about 1 more minute, so I want to give the speakers an opportunity. Any closing remarks before we say goodbye to our captive audience today?
Well, I just want to thank everyone on the call for coming in, my fellow presenters, as well as all the participants. Definitely utilize your local libraries. They need you. And again, all libraries are more than books and free Wi-Fi. And definitely give love to your libraries. Thanks for having me.
I think that is a wonderful message to end on. Thank you so much to Samantha, Courtney, and Kelly for the work that you're doing and for spending your valuable time with us this afternoon. Please, everyone, keep a lookout for our future webinar series. We hope to have you on another one of these someday, and enjoy the rest of your day.